This is 1,000 words. My name is Radu. Welcome to a new video. Today I want to share with you my opinions and impressions after having used the wonderful Fujifilm X-T2 for a bit over a month. Now, while in no way a review, this video is going to be conclusions I have reached, impressions I have had, and one or two changes of mind I have had since I've used this. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video, I want to remind you about this camera. This is the Minolta HiMatic 7S, a 1966 rangefinder film camera featuring a Minolta RAW Core PF, a 45mm f1.8 lens. A pretty great lens at that, a pretty great camera. A camera I'm going to be giving out today. If you happen to watch my Pankola review, it's gonna be in one of those corners. It's when I started this giveaway. Not a lot of people seem to have paid attention, so I think it's just a couple of folks that met all the requirements. So I think we're gonna make do with what we've got and pick out a winner out of just a really small handful of people. Nonetheless, this camera will find its new owner today, so stick around until the end of the video when we use one of those thingamajigs that randomly generates a person to win this camera. I mentioned at the beginning of this video the fact that my mind has been changed a bit after having used the Fujifilm X-T2. Now, back in the day, I think it was 2016 or thereabouts, was when I got my first proper camera. I had been doing photography of the street variety for a number of years prior to that, using my smartphone. But it's then when I got my first camera. It was a crop sensor camera, a Canon 760D, Rebel something something in the US. And since getting the first camera and starting to learn about photography, it was like a carrot on the stick, the fact that you needed to get a full frame camera. And this claim has some merits because let's not beat around the bush. All things being equal, a bigger sensor will be better than a smaller sensor. It's just optics, it's physics, it's electronics. It has to do with signal to noise ratio. It has to do with the size of the photo sites on the sensor. Generally speaking, all things being equal, I repeat, a larger sensor will be better than a smaller sensor. So I do not mean to discredit nor could I ever, the fact that a full frame camera is probably the better camera you can get, all things being equal. What I do mean to say is that things rarely are all equal. So there's a lot of nuance. There are a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration when judging sensor sizing and making purchase decisions, because full frame is not necessarily always better than crop, especially in this day and age when practically all cameras launched in the last decade are ranging from good to great. I don't think there's any camera that's been launched during the last decade that sucks. I really struggle with this concept. I don't think this is possible. The amazing advancements in camera technologies have made all cameras pretty great. On the other hand, considering what I do, the type of photography I do, the type of conditions I shoot in, my requirements as far as camera bodies, sensor sizes, image quality and performance, I have come to the conclusion that full frame is not necessarily better than crop. And this is something I thought for the longest time. Going back to my first crop sensor camera, a full frame camera was something that all serious photographers eventually graduate to. And it's just a one-way street, going from bad to good to great. As far as your skills go, you necessarily go from crop to full frame. Now, here I am going back to crop sensor. This is something I was very worried about ever since I started considering switching from from Sony to something else. This is months ago. I always thought I will have problems with shooting in low light conditions, high ISO issues, really poor performance, and I am glad to say this is not something, happily, this is not something that I have found. I have found that the sensor on the X-T2 is really capable. If push comes to shove and you really do need to crank up that ISO, there's really no two ways about it. Images coming out of this sensor shot at 12,800 are really decent and serviceable. And there's really not much of a difference between the Sony and the X-T2. There is some, and I won't beat around the bush claiming there are none, but for what I do, for the type of photography that I do, that difference is not worth mentioning, except perhaps for the sake of the discussion. But at the end of the day, I'm really happy with the images coming out of this camera. On the subject of sensor sizes and optics, again, let me say it another way. I will be the first to admit I'm a bit of a bokeh whore. I do love me that shallow depth of field, that creamy, blurry, buttery smooth background, the awesome subject separation a full frame sensor coupled with a fast lens is able to produce. But that said, I have come to the conclusion that I kind of fetishized this entire concept of bokeh and blur. While certainly beautiful and oftentimes useful, pragmatically speaking, because sometimes you need to isolate your subject, and you do that either by means of composition or with the help of a really shallow depth of field. That's not really why I used it. I really shot a lot of wide open, mostly wide open, simply because I love the way it looks. I love the shallow depth of field. However, I loved it a bit too much for my own sake, because especially seeing how I shot vintage glass, manual focus lenses, that is meaning to say that I missed focus a lot. Having shot this camera with this 35mm equivalent lens, the 23 f2WR, I have come to the conclusion that shallow depth of field is not all that. I mean, sure, beautiful, sure, useful, but a good picture is better than a bad picture with a blurry background. Now, there is a caveat here. The 35mm equivalent on this camera is on the wider side of things, so I will not realistically be expecting much in the way of background blur. I do plan to purchase the 35mm f2, a 50mm equivalent, probably by Friday, and that will be able to deliver quite a bit more in terms of blurry backgrounds. And if we're talking about blurry backgrounds, there are plenty of f1.4, f1.2s, even third-party f0.95 lenses, and those, believe me, provide copious amounts of background blur and bokeh-licious backgrounds. Moving on, well, let me reach my back. Let me reach for the Sony. This camera is for sale, by the way. I'm selling my A7R II. I always liked pretty things. I always thought it important that my gear look nice. And while a lot of people seem to think Sony cameras are butt ugly, purely utilitarian, really hideous, I was not ever in that camp. I always thought Sony cameras are pretty nice. Especially, yeah, pretty sexy, huh? Pretty damn sexy. Pretty damn sexy. Why is it mirrored like that? Anyhow. Especially coupled with a vintage lens, this was never an unpleasant sight. However, this suffered a bit as far as ergonomics go. And having shot the Fuji, I have come to the conclusion that looks, feels, and especially ergonomics matter more, even more so than I thought they did, and I always thought they matter a lot. Now, with the vintage lens on here, there is quite sufficient amount of space here between the grip and the lens. However, as soon as you mount a native piece of glass, they tend to be chunkier and wider. There is just the tiniest amount of space between the grip and the lens, and it's really uncomfortable. I have used, just for a little while, the Sigma 45mm f2.8, the DGDN Contemporary, and while that's not a large lens by any stretch of the imagination, it's a bit bigger than a vintage lens, and while not actually hurting my fingers, it was really uncomfortable using it. I'm not sure how Sony cameras have been designed with this in mind, because I mean, you have to be a child or a girl to be able to comfortably hold that. There's really not enough space between the grip and the lens. And yeah, to make it comfortable, I had to attach an L plate, a metal grip that extended the camera a little, so as my pinky finger has something to do and somewhere to go. This is not an issue with this. While the grip is noticeably thinner, it's designed in such a way that my hand falls really beautifully and comfortably to snugly hold and carry this camera. I considered getting a metal extender grip for this, but I don't really need it. It's so comfortable, it's really pleasant to hold. I can hold it for hours. It's really comfortable. On a related note, I have also found that smaller is better than bigger. That's what she said, right? No, she didn't. But yeah, smaller is better than bigger, and lighter is better than heavier. I always liked small pieces of gear, small, capable, powerful pieces of gear. I'm shooting myself on the Osmo Pocket version 1. That's a tiny little packet that shoots really fantastic 4K 60, really great. I've been doing YouTube with it for the last year and I can't be happier with it. I really love pocketable, small, compact equipment, and this is much the same in much the same ways. Very compact, very light, yet it feels sturdy, it feels really great, fantastic construction, feels significant, it feels like a pro camera, while not much larger than a phone. It's really great at that. Fantastic ergos, really great feel in the hand, and I can just fling it on my shoulder and walk the city for hours and not even know it's there. When I need it, I just whoop, put it to my eye and shoot. When I don't, I just fling it back, and it just gets out of the way. I love this camera for the fact that when I need it to, it performs and delivers. When I don't, it just gets out of the way. On the subject of construction, while considering other systems, I always found the idea of weather sealing rather appealing. Now, I don't often really read that ever. Go shooting underneath waterfalls, in torrential rain, inside dank, humid Amazonian forests. I wanted weather sealing for my peace of mind. There have been occasions when I missed out on shots because of weather, or rather lack thereof, weather sealing. While the A7R II is weather sealed, that's a subject for another video. Some people claim it's not all that weather sealed, and some of the flaps have no gaskets at all. But hey, the manufacturer claims it is, so I will take their word for it. While it is supposedly weather sealed, my vintage lenses weren't. None of them were. So I really didn't ever dare shoot during rain or really heavy snow, or really take it in situations where it would get really humid. I did go to the mountain and change environments really quickly, and it developed a lot of condensation this winter, or was it, yeah, winter before that, never mind. But I mean to say that I was kind of worried a little, because it was dripping wet. It was really wet, and while I repeat, while the camera claims to be weather sealed, the lenses weren't, and fungus really loves humid, dark spots. So now owning this camera and lens that are really brilliantly weather sealed, it's just great peace of mind, great feeling to be able to feel like you can depend on your gear. I mean, I'm not going to go swimming with it, but I am going to go shooting when it's raining or snowing or a lot of humidity in the air or dust or whatnot. Which brings me to my final point, and perhaps the most important one. Having studied the Fujifilm ecosystem these past few weeks, I realized that they seem to approach their lens lineup in a way not a lot of manufacturers do. Canon are notorious, and they're getting a lot of flack online because they seem to be very stubborn, completely refusing to open up their mount to third-party makers. I don't know a lot about Nikon, but I suspect they're much the same. I do know a lot about Sony because I've used it for the last couple of few years, more than a couple of years, quite a few years. And I used vintage lenses firstly for reasons of cost. They cost little and I was able to afford them. Realistically speaking, I was never going to afford a G Master, let alone a few primes, let alone their fast zooms. So I always felt kind of like a second-hand citizen. While certainly true that there are a lot of options as far as third-party lenses go for the Sony mount, they were still rather expensive. Couple that with the fact that full-frame lenses tend to be big and heavy, I always felt it like a no-brainer, as far as I'm concerned, to stick with small, light, easy to find, affordable vintage lenses. Now, on the other hand, going back to the Fuji lens ecosystem, I feel like my money's worth something. The little that I do have packs a greater punch. They're mid-range lenses because let's say the XEs are the low range, the XF F2s are mid-range lenses. Their Fujicron lineup is really fantastic. Arguably mid-range because F2 is sufficiently fast. It's not an f1.4 nor is it an f1.2. It's really great, fantastic optics, weather sealed, metal construction, dedicated aperture ring, really fantastic all around. Competitors reserve features like an aperture ring and weather resistance for their top-of-the-line lenses. Fuji seems to cater to those of us that can't afford to spend thousands and thousands on lenses. Then there's the top of the line, the f1.4s, the f1.2s, the f1.0. While more expensive, they are still reachable. Realistically speaking, I can see myself being able to afford one or two of those a year, perhaps, in a good year. I don't mean to sound like it is not meant to be a pity party. Far from that. I'm blessed and really grateful for a lot of things in my life, and I feel like I have a lot, certainly a lot more than I deserve. But it is what it is. I am speaking reality. I could not realistically afford a G Master anytime soon, but I can realistically afford an f1.4, let's say the 35mm, especially secondhand. These days, sites like MPB offer really great value for money. So, all in all, these are my thoughts and impressions after having used this camera for the last month. Have you figured out already that I'm a fanboy? I'm really loving this. I'm really gushing about this to everybody that I get the chance to. Fantastic. Really great to use. I keep finding stuff in that category of small quality of life features, small things that mean a lot. Go watch that video. We're at that part where we're going to pick out a winner for the Minolta HiMatic, focus, 7S, a 1966 rangefinder film camera. There were only 3 people that followed all the requirements. There were only 3. You needed to write down your Instagram handle, you needed to follow me on Instagram, and you needed to be a subscriber of the channel. Now let's start spinning and see who's the lucky winner. I guess it's Spaceman Lou. Congrats, congrats. Let's just see if he's following me on Instagram. Spaceman Lou. He's following me. Let's see if he's a subscriber. Where is it? I'm not even sure where to see that. Spaceman Lou. Spaceman Lou. Spaceman Lou. Does it say? Subscriptions. These are his subscriptions. 1K words. There has got to be an easier way. Well, that just confirms it. He follows me on Instagram, he follows me on YouTube, and congratulations, Lou. I will be getting in touch with you. Now this has been all. Congratulations, Lou, again. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, farewell.